Welcome back, everyone. If you've been listening off and on, you've probably caught some of our conversations Paul and I have had, and then the recent interview we did with Chris Lucian from Hunter. And we're continuing on this thread about the software craft practices, and especially as it relates to AI assisted development in those areas. We've got a couple of topics that we've gotten as we interact with our own AI that it suggested would be helpful. And as we've gone through the notes, we thought it'd be good to bring those up. So this one overall, the theme is about the AI assisted death march, but it relates to the topic Larry and I talked about before, is how to use AI without burning out. And really, it's a point that what we see is developers and management, engineering in general, can see AI as this magic button in some ways that we want to walk through. Also, as a pair partner, what does that look like from borrowing a little bit from XP and some ideas that are out there? And be looking forward in the future of what we will be putting out that might be more guided opportunities to walk through what those simulations look like so you can see hands-on what they look like. But for now, we're going to walk through those topics as an idea, discuss a bit so you can get some direction about where we're going and things you might be wanting watching for as well overall. So we have this issue, and I'll hand it off to you, Paul, on this one, where we have a lot of pressure, obviously, about use AI. Everyone's got Copilot now, and this pressure, literally, some companies that start tracking, are you using it or not? And even the most recent I heard, which was, if you're not using AI at all, if you're doing anything by hand on coding, you're going to get in trouble, like that extreme. And I think that pressure is because they're feeling like, oh, management sees it, we will get so much more done, so much more value, so it's faster if we use AI. And yet that seems that that could cause a number of problems in that ripple effect. So I'll pause on that one because this idea about doing more can lead to certain problems I know that you've talked about before. So what do you see would happen if I'm a manager and I'm talking to you, hey, Paul, we're looking at using AI. I hear we can get so much more done. What kind of concerns are you going to raise to me to say true and dot, dot, dot?
Yeah, and it's interesting that it came up with this AI assisted death march because I feel that the Agile community was really in response to the death marches of the 90s. You
Mm-hmm.
know, one of the first extreme programming practices was sustainable pace. In the first edition of the book, they called it 40-hour work week because it was pretty standard work, 60 hours, 80 hours, give up your
Oh, yeah.
weekends, give up your life
Yep.
for this project. You
Yep.
know, and any number of us worked on those projects where it didn't succeed. We lost the company, we lost the project, and we screwed up our family lives because of it. And I was talking to somebody the other day about, we're in this mode of AI zombies and AI vampires where they're just always twiddling
Mm-hmm.
it. I'm thinking about the people at slot machines. They're just pushing the button, pushing the button. And at a slot machine, occasionally you get a payout. More often than not, you go bankrupt. And
It's
that's
true.
what I would advise the managers is like, how do you measure success? How do you say, call it quits. You've expended your bankroll. You need to
Right.
take a break, go do something else. And that gets back to what we've been talking about within Rocket 9. How do we measure success?
Mm-hmm.
We can generate a lot of content. We're generating more content right now, but if we don't see some sort of payback in it, is it the right thing to be doing?
Right. You gave that example of the old school video game that didn't have the manual, so we're just smashing buttons. But now there's a cost of just smashing buttons to see are we generating value or not. There really is a cost, bottom line cost, and also technical debt cost, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're starting to see some of that come back to us. I'm thinking back to the dot-com era where pets.com would deliver something for free, $25 off, and you'd be like, how
How
can
the
this work? And it doesn't, you know. We're starting to see the cost of these tokens starting to go up because the first one's free. Now that you're hooked, come on, this is what it's really going to cost you.
True. And the issue in my mind is not only might it generate a lot at a cost, right? And for the folks who are developers or and management for the developers, are you seeing those numbers? Are you getting a single bill? Do you know by developer? Do you know what it was that they're even
Hmm.
working on? So it's really hard to formulate that cost. We're seeing some shift on the FinOps side for that. But more than that, look, if you're any of you listening I should say has technical debt, which is very common, I think ubiquitous, think about that the death march on hurry up and do it, but you're actually 10xing the technical debt. And worse, you didn't code it. So the way it got coded may or may not even be structurally correct, may not have test cases around any of that stuff. And so what you could have just done was made your life much worse in the future. So now what you got to do isn't generate new features. You got to clean up a heck of a big mess for that might have cost us money too. And I don't know that any of those practices, Paul, I know you talk about in this, obviously in the CSD class and other classes, but what your experience is when people come in class, the familiarity of just the common tools that they would use to know how to build code well, how to avoid technical debt. And now
Hmm.
you just gave them like a superpower to 10x that technical debt. But what's your survey of the folks out there on awareness of how to handle technical debt as they're coding, building?
I think it's some of that misapplication of technical debt thinking in terms of what Ward Cunningham originally meant. I'm going to go into debt today, but pay it off over time versus I've just generated this pile that's going to bury me sooner or later, and I'm going to have to declare bankruptcy and try it again from scratch. And maybe AI changes some of the dynamics of that. Maybe we can regenerate it from scratch again, but
Mhm.
it goes back to how do we know, is it doing the right thing? Is it doing efficiently? And it's going to require us as developers to have a little bit more understanding than just the code in front of us. What is the operating environment that that code's running in? What does it look like in production? How do I measure that? What are risks that I need to watch out for there in terms of liability, et cetera, et cetera?
There's a couple of things I'm going to add on to that. One, people learning those skills at some point, and then definitely when you're, I was going to say preaching, teaching, like pairing and mobbing as a way to learn these skills that maybe some of the senior devs have learned over time. And now we have juniors coming in, and I have concerns that juniors might come in saying, "Oh, AI is doing all this for me," and never actually learn those skills. And if we as a company don't have those practices of pairing and mobbing, like Chris Lucian talked about,
Yeah.
those skills you're talking about wouldn't even just naturally get transferred from senior engineers down to the juniors who are joining the team, right? So they could just run
Hmm.
off and do that. Yeah, I think that would be a problem. So some of that is how we collaborate and learn. I know it's some of what's taught in the class as well.
Another thing from the extreme programming world is that we have this notion of collective code ownership. In the old days, it was like, I wrote the code, I know the code, nobody else does.
Hmm.
We started to do pairing and mobbing and teaming to get a collective understanding. But now we're getting back to somebody else wrote that code, I've inherited it. What do I do? How
Right.
do I measure it? How do I confirm its behavior? And that's a lot of what we cover in the CSD. How do I get confident in the code is doing what I expect it to do?
Massive. I don't know if I've talked to a company in years that did not have those knowledge silos that only one person knows X. And I hope
Hmm.
they don't win the lottery or get hit by a bus, or however you want to call it. But that is at risk, as well as the classic Phoenix project said that person is the only one that knows X. They get spread so thin. So now you've
Yeah,
delayed delivery. And I can imagine people taking that same mindset because they're not talking about with you with collective ownership, which I love, right? It's not my work and your work, it's our work, but teams
yeah.
don't usually work that way. Now you throw AI in, and I'm just sitting there just knocking out stuff by myself. There's even less reason for me to go and talk with anyone else, much less slow down, which I remember that you had that classic out there. It's slowing us down. It costs too much to do
Uh-huh.
TDD, right? But I'm not going to slow down with AI to share knowledge because I'm not even used to working that way anyways. I could see that becoming a much bigger problem too.
Yeah, what you described, the one person knowing the system, now we're one removed from that because we've got one person that knows how to tell what the system is doing. And if that person disappears, we've got two holes.
Yep.
So we've got
Yep.
to figure out how they got there and what it is that they delivered.
So one thing for people listening that's common in the circles that Paul's in is what they have these they call katas or code katas, where they actually take some principle or practice. And he's talked about them in some of the past videos. If you're curious, you can look around. But there's an idea around AI as far as practicing some of the things we're talking about and cutting in. And they called it like the AI code kata. So rather than learn how to write something new with AI, which actually is fairly easy. I mean, I've
Hmm.
got a technical background, but I'm surprised how easy I can make stuff and then have to, as we found out in my own experience, like, well, this has now gotten beyond what I can understand and support. So I just have to drop it. Um, Try getting some area where you can refactor some of the legacy code and work on that, but work on that with yourself or work on that with the group. So when you've seen some of these katas, for those who aren't aware of some of that, maybe you can briefly describe what the idea of a kata is and how a group might run it when they sit down to say, let's see if we can practice some of these ways that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, so real quickly, the idea of a code kata is that in majority of the professions out there, the professionals spend a lot of time practicing. If you think about like an orchestra, they perform once, but they're practicing months up to that point. Pro sports, they're on the field during the game, but the majority of the season is practice. And we could give more and more examples of that. So in the technical coding world, your practice and your delivery are the same thing. You go into work and you try stuff out, goes into production, did it work or not? So code katas were a way to like pull that back, get to the bare essence of what we're trying to understand and learn. And we create a lot of code katas in different languages, with the key being that whatever we generate during the kata, we throw away. It's the learning, it's the
Yeah.
understanding that we're taking back to our work and to our team to get to what we see in those other professions, the muscle memory. It just happens naturally. And when something goes astray, we're not thrown by that. We've got the muscle memory to help us out with those areas as well.
It's really, really big. So in this case, they gave an example of saying, have AI write the tool and then explain the design patterns that are
Yeah.
they've seen, write some unit tests around that. And then you added something good. I think you'd said basically, yeah, and then have the person explain how it's working, right? The junior or whatever, right? So speak to that, why that's so important as a test to say, do you really understand the system? And you've really stressed that. Do you really understand what it's doing or what you just created, whether AI did it or you coded it, right?
Yeah, I'm smiling because when I read a technical book, it takes me 4 times as long as reading a magazine article or fiction because I'm trying to think through it. I may stop and get my hands on the keyboard. So having the AI explain a design pattern to me, yeah, I could skim that and understand it. But what if I actually sketch the design pattern out on a piece of paper? What if I try to talk to somebody and, hey, let me explain this to you. Are we using the same pattern language that is common out there? Am I checking up on the AI? Is it using the words and not delivering the intent behind it? Make
Yes.
sure you've got that double loop learning going on there, that you're not just going through the motions, which sometimes a kata can be. Just get the finger things down.
Mm-hmm.
But more often, it's like, do I have the understanding of why we're doing this?
Yes, yeah, and that's just something to be honest. It's just that's the good hard work. But now you do understand it because in the end,
Mhm.
some way the level you're making me think, who am I trusting that this is doing what I want? Because if I can't explain it and I don't actually know what the code did, wrote it, and we don't have either the unit test or some way to verify it, and we don't even have clarity on the requirements, right? BDD, I can at least read through the test versus maybe understanding a
Yeah.
PRD. I'm with you. I think that could be problematic. And so we're slowing down to say, let's do these practices and teach backs on some of that. I think it's really, really nice. So the other thing is talked about is the shared learning that happens when we're doing this, perhaps in a mobbing session. And for those who haven't mobbed and haven't taken Paul's class would know what that's like. Why would it matter that I'm just maybe doing some of this by myself versus I'm with a pair or I'm with a team? We took some particular slice of something or problem, or we're doing a kata, right? There's different scenarios they could use, right? But the importance that you've seen that we're doing it as a group versus I'm just doing it solo. And I hear Paul, so I'm doing this on my own, but I'm not going to bother anyone else. And we're not going to do this as a group or a team. Why would that make a difference?
Yeah, well, I mean, this goes back to the origins of Agile development. Why did we say that we want to have the whole team sitting together? Why do we want to incorporate the business? Because we learned through the 80s and 90s that when we try to write the requirements down in a document and hand it off, we don't know what we're going to get back. I may read something one way, and with my lens on it, I'm fully confident I absolutely understand it and I'm going to implement it correctly. And then I give it to you, and I'm like, yeah, that's what I said, but that's not what I meant. And we see that all the time. And that's why we want to have that shared understanding, that incremental delivery, that iterative development, giving a minimal marketable feature in front of somebody, building on top of that. And I think AI is just another factor that we're adding to that mix of that shared collaboration.
Absolutely. We do try to dog food this. And I would honestly say for even though our sessions are not like those as large or on the enterprise software like you would work with and those teams, even as we're doing internally R9, I'm amazed like how much I'm learning. So for example, when you're walking us through, we're trying to debug one of the applications before and how thinly you were slicing the steps. Because in my mind, like, no, this is, it can do X, Y, Z. Like, wait, let's verify, take small steps. And what I thought was like really slowing it down, it ensured that black and white test, is it doing that or not? And how can we verify that? And we did expose some things like, oh, I didn't realize it was keeping memory context refreshed, that type of thing. That was powerful. How much I'm learning from what's possible with AI. So when Jessica and I are doing some design work using Cloud for design or what's possible to be built and as watching people, but the amount that we get traded, or when I was doing work on market research with Ryan, and he's blown away like I didn't know. I think there's so much that happens when we're working together versus I'm
Hmm.
just reading something or learning in so many different ways. I'm like, I've not once questioned that we have these regular mobbing and pairing sessions and doing a work item together, preferably. How much
Yeah.
good stuff happens from that?
And another thing that I've been calling out in some of our sessions is celebrate when we're making progress and success.
That's true.
As a solo developer, getting back to the Death March node, it's like I got that done, but now I've still got this avalanche bearing down on me, and I don't take the time to say, I've made progress, I've delivered value.
Yeah. easy to miss that. 'Cause no one listening, I'm sure, has a shortage of work, right? And you just go on to the next thing. And we should pause. And in some ways, for those, again, especially on the developer side, what I've seen, Paul, is there really is a joy in learning. It's good to
Hmm.
learn. But if we don't make space to just say,
Yeah.
this is for learning, we enjoy learning, and that's great too, you miss out.
Well, and like build ceremonies and reward yourself. I'm thinking back to my first extreme programming team. Every 50 tests we write, we would walk across the street and get a shake. You know, there was a fast food place around the corner, and we would just go celebrate because we're learning, we're building, we're creating that safety net around the
I
code.
love it. I would be much more motivated to hit that 50 if I knew I was going to get a shake. I'd be jumping
Yeah.
in. Awesome. The other part that has come up before is this idea about people who use AI know about hallucinations, and it's going to be just as true in the code it creates. So, in case anyone's not aware, it will deliver something and think it's great, but it might, to Paul's point, it might not actually delivering the function I expect. It might not have even thought of edge cases, things like that. It's a great creator of lines of code. How smart is it? I mean, it depends on lots of different factors. So they had made this comment. They said, treat the AI output like a pull request from a summer intern. It might be brilliant. It might be dangerous, right? And the key takeaway is around the transparency as we're doing our work that we're flagging, tagging some of this. And you and I got into a little bit of a conversation about why that might matter when we look back at code. And you gave a reference a long time ago, oh, it's all stamped out. Like, do not touch this code. But we might want to actually flag some of these and then purposely bring them back for a peer review, right?
Hmm.
I'm sure you've seen some of these practices where people are doing stuff and the way they might flag things in the code and how they bring back, not necessarily always like a traditional code review. We always code review things, but how do we do targeted, insightful? Let's make this more transparent about what AI might be creating and how they could do it as a team.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of other factors that are at play there. Having situational awareness.
Hmm.
Where do I think the landscape is versus what the AI is telling me is going on? Thinking to all of the examples where these are just telling somebody to turn left and all of a sudden they're in a pond, just looking around at what's going on and not believing the computer when you have to. And also some aspect of systems thinking.
Hmm.
The AI's got its notion of what the world is, but we've got a much more realistic of what we're operating in, sense of how things ought to behave and what we expect things to be doing. I think
Yeah.
that's my hardest skepticism on AI is that it just doesn't know. It's just putting words together, and we, as gullible human beings, will take it in and go, okay, that makes sense because we like to understand things.
Right. You brought up something earlier that our ability as a developer to understand the system, the whole, versus we're probably used to just knowing a piece of that.
Yeah.
XP practice will pull us back into that, right? Like the collective ownership, et cetera. But you said this is really important. A way to verify either what AI just generated for me as a developer or just important as an individual team member. Do I understand the whole system? Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, so I think there was a pretty natural progression from junior developer, senior developer, and maybe you got to be the architecture level where you're not so much hands-on code, but you do know all the pieces of the system, where the data stores are, what are the dependencies outside of us. And I think AI is going to build up the requirement for that muscle much more. Because if you take away I have to have the code in my head, now I've got to have the system in my head, that's what's going to be a lot more valuable to organizations out there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think there's a shift. There's something that I had highlighted, I thought, and I hadn't seen this before, but I felt it's worth coming back to as the idea of I think they call it the preceptor, that someone's intentionally aware of where this is going, what that big picture is about that. And I think we're expecting people to have back to readability, spec driven. I do more of a review afterwards.
Hmm.
I think it is a different skill and it's pulling them forward to that. But I think it's the first time I've seen this made so clearly like, yeah, that's a thing that we want to be looking for and pay attention to. The system, especially, because
Yeah,
I am
and
like an architect a little bit to know I'm
mhm.
not actually writing the code as much like an architect in the recent past would be. And now maybe I'm kind of put back in that seat a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm watching out for is that we've got decades of how do we segment the code and put it into directories and folders and files, et cetera, et cetera. But now that we're starting to build these AI systems, everybody's got their markdown files and this and that, and they're just scattered across your desk. And it's like, where do I find what I need? And I think there's going to be a lot more work in that. How do we organize that? How does the system interpret it? And then how do I find what I need after the fact?
put a little bit of a bow on this for now. But again, look for things where we get a chance to walk through, because I think what we'll see, this is my honest opinion, for the, not that those who know me think I'm not going to give my honest opinion, because I typically ask permission to tell the truth. But Paul, sincerely, I think the things that I was always concerned about with SoftwareCraft, that what you bring in the training classes, in the past, like kind of like a nice to have. Well, that would be nice. But by and large, we didn't worry that the system wasn't scalable. Total cost of ownership just wasn't there. We got to do a rewrite so soon because the code's just a mess. We would hear this all the time from devs, but I don't think that the ownership of the system, like management, the stakeholders, they really felt the pain. But the truth is, what we're seeing with AI, it is an incredibly powerful tool. But if you didn't have those practices in the past and you have problems with technical debt, and now all you do is just hammer down the gas pedal, I think what we're doing is, one, creating a lot more technical debt. And when you talk about pushing the buttons, they're paying for those pushing the buttons now. This isn't free. And the cost is going up. If you haven't seen the marketplace, it's shifting a bit to no, there's no more free lunch here with using AI. It's going to go up. So I feel like the danger is going to be much more painful for not having some of this. I don't know how you want to graph it. It's not just SoftwareCraft. It's like a maturity. It's an aspect of an engineer's view of that. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I think there's some notion that creating the software is free, and once it's built, there's no cost. And you were talking about the total cost of ownership, but really making the decision, does it make sense to extend the life of this feature, because there is ongoing cost associated with it. I think we see at a large scale things disappearing from our lives here and there, that somebody's made that call. But at the code level, I don't see that happening very much.
No.
Somebody saying that we built this feature, we've monetized it as much as we can. Does it make sense to be part of our system still?
Never mind the security risks, these other things that companies are already rightfully concerned about, but I think there's a hidden cost if they're not being mindful. I think the thing I'd referenced earlier is we used to just say, how productive are our developers? How good are they? And they would do something like lines of code. Now, I don't want to put anyone down, but that's not a good measurement, right? But we're kind of coming back to
And
that.
yet, I saw something this afternoon where somebody that we respect said, here's the lines of code we had pre-AI, here's the lines of code we have after AI. And I'm like, so?
Yeah, well,
You know?
yeah.
Talk to me about revenue. Talk to me about income.
Yeah, and I think the lack of some semblance of, I would think in the past we had a semblance of control of this because maybe we did code reviews or other things. I'm just seeing some of these fall down a little bit in the midst of its generating code, et cetera. And we didn't have good testing practices, good test, all this, all that we would recommend. I think it gets multiplied. So it can get really expensive in a lot of ways that people are anticipating. I think we'll see a bit of a, I won't say tsunami, but a big tidal wave coming back like, oops, we didn't realize how much now we've created that's a bigger mess to fix. So we'll pick up some of these topics in the past. And for those who are curious what those practices are that Paul's touched on, we can dive a bit deeper into those and then maybe even pull up the IDs and then walk through examples of what he's talking about, because that's really what's in his toolbox. Or actually, the image on his slide decks is a whole one of those big, expensive toolboxes. It's not a single toolbox. It's a very big set of tools to give you some handles for how to bring that into AI so you can do it responsibly, feel good about it, and actually have knowledge of what the AI system is doing and make the most of what it can do, but with the awareness and maturity. Like, I know the risks and costs of some of this, and we handle it with that level of awareness and maturity. So stay tuned on that. And of course, if anyone has comments, questions, let us know. We're happy to pull in those as part of the conversations and bring that out. If you have any other questions regarding the classes I've mentioned that Paul teaches, come with the rocket9solutions.com website. Look for his CSD classes, or the BDD class have been popular, I think, because of the AI as well, and software engineering, and a whole lot more. Glad to talk with you or hop on a call and just explain a little bit more about what those are and the value that the students have gotten from those classes as well. So thanks for joining, everyone.